Climate. What's the new one? Climate crisis. That's you're going to hear that more and more now. Climate crisis. Yeah.
Got to get in on that climate crisis.
Which is what I love about your work and Randall's working on. When you start looking at the past and how I mean, we'll get into it. We're almost ready to go here, but just how can you not have a different view when you realize how fast things have changed in the past and how dramatic it's been?
Yeah, I know. It's it's a surprise, I expect, to many climate scientists even that.
And it shouldn't be though, right?
Yeah. I'm not. I know. I've heard sort of Randall is sort of. He's not a believer, if you like, in the sort of climate, global warming thing. Whereas I'm more. I take the scientific viewpoint, the sort of establishment on that. So I think it is still a very important issue. And I don't have any reason to doubt the climate models and their predictions.
Well, Randall would say that we're having an effect for sure, and I think that too. I mean, we're having an effect, but it's how much of an effect and what's the solution is kind of a different thing.
Yeah, I'm ready to rock.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, this will be fun.
Okay.
Oh, I forgot to put in the SIM card. Can you imagine we do the whole interview? I could rip the audio from YouTube. I have a couple backups in place. Just
All right, from all the way across the pond, we've got Dr. Martin Sweatman with us. He's a chemical engineer and a researcher and the author of Prehistory Decoded. He's got a YouTube channel as well talking about this stuff. And thanks for coming on the show, Martin.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, like we were talking about, we just spent like 10 days with Randall Carlson, and we got quite a bit of theory about some of the stuff that you talk about in your book as well, and that you've been researching. So I don't know where maybe we should start at you're a scientist already, and then you've kind of got into this writing about ancient history, like Göbekli Tepe, and decoded some of that. So I think a good place to start would be, the genesis of that and that transition. Because I mean, I've read a couple skeptical takes on your book as well, and they don't seem too happy with a preordained scientist going after all this ancient decoding and all that. So maybe we could start with the transition.
Well, my background is physics, so my sort of PhD is theoretical physics. So I'm very grounded in science, the scientific method, and the same with my research at the moment is chemical physics. I teach chemical engineering.
Yeah.
So that's got absolutely nothing to do with any of this, really, apart from the scientific connection.
Yeah, exactly.
Having said that, I think it probably was useful when it comes to decoding Göbekli Tepe. I mean, I like many people, like many scientists, just interested in how strange the world is, whether it's quantum mechanics, whether it's whether it's hardcore physics or whether it's the ancient world or whatever. So all these sort of mysteries of the world are of interest. And I was interested in Göbekli Tepe, and I read Graham Hancock's book. I've been following all sorts of literature on Göbekli Tepe, and I read Graham's book, and I could see there that there was something to what he was saying about the Pillar 43. So that's known as the Vulture Stone. And although I didn't think his explanation was quite right, I could see that already there was something. The patterns there were already pretty well matched up, and it looked to be more than a coincidence. But with only the three patterns that he had matched to the pillar, it could have been a coincidence. Anyway, after I investigated further, and I think the sort of my background in my research is statistical mechanics. What does that mean? That's it means that my sort of everyday job in research is understanding the statistics of how atoms and molecules are, how they can be oriented and located in space. And it's exactly the kind of training and understanding you need to understand or to decode the pillar, which is basically just the same kind of thing. You've got these different objects, in this case it's the animal symbols, located in different positions and different orientations. And so I could build a sort of scientific well, not entirely scientific. I could start to build a scientific case to try and decode that pillar. Clearly, at the end of the day, it's still there's a degree of subjectivity to it because it's requiring some degree of pattern matching. So it's not a completely scientific case, but it was good enough for me. I could see how well the patterns matched, so I convinced myself of the statistical case, and then that led on to all sorts of other things. Eventually, I was able to show actually this was objectively true.
So that led you down into the rabbit hole of Göbekli Tepe after sort of after reading Graham Hancock's book and checking out this pillar. That kind of led you to trying to decode the whole thing, sort of, not the whole thing, but more of it.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, 3 years ago this all started.
3 years ago.
I didn't have any knowledge. Well, I'd read sort of standard literature on Göbekli Tepe, so I knew a bit about it, but I had no real idea of this sort of alternative universe.
Were you into like the megalithic stuff or ancient aliens or the pyramids or any kind of other that deeper sort of like, either the astronomical aspect or the sacred geometrical aspect of it?
Well, okay, I'm sort of familiar with some of those ideas through reading Graham Hancock's book mostly. A few YouTube videos. So I knew about the Sphinx, the weathering, so that was something I knew about. But how it all fitted together and going back beyond into prehistory, my knowledge of the sort of Ice Age and the Neolithic was pretty sketchy. So I've done a lot of reading, a lot of learning, and quite a lot of discovering, I think.
What was that process like for you? I mean, like churning through all that stuff. I mean, because that's kind of like, I kind of really, I've been following it most of my, here and there over my life, but since we started the podcast, it's been like a 6 year sort of deep dive into a lot of stuff, and it's a continuous thing. So I'm curious to see like what that process of, I guess you could almost call it an awakening, was like for you.
I mean, the most sort of profound moments were the actual discoveries when you actually see, oh my God, this is true. When you actually discover something new, and you have the statistical case to back you up, so that you pretty much know that you're right. And that's a sort of eureka moment that you get that in science anyway. It doesn't have to be this, but this is a particularly strong case of wow, because it's such an important and such a big breakthrough, really. Yeah. So there's sort of discovery eureka moments, and then you kind of get used to that. And now it's just a case of almost every day finding something which that fits into it as well. This is sort of grand unified theory almost, or prehistory, and everything sort of fits together. Whether it's the mythology or the climate, or the megafauna, or the astronomy, or whatever it is, it all ties in.
Yeah. Can you do me a favor? Just try and slide your mic over a little bit on the right. If you could just try and slide that over a bit, or it's just scratching a little. Yeah. That out. Yeah. Perfect. That should be good. Yeah. Right. So I got so many questions now. Maybe we should start. What do you want to do? Summarize like the premise of the book itself.
Yeah,
because that's kind of going to get into.
Yeah, I think let's start with sort of a quick gist of what we're talking about, and then we can sort of go from there.
Well, the key thing is really what I'm trying to address in the videos on YouTube that I've put up, which is the discovery of an ancient zodiac.
Right.
So it means that we can read basically lots of these old Neolithic and Paleolithic symbols that were previously just thought to be animals, maybe just representing hunting trips or something like this. But now, no, it's absolutely clear that they're representing constellations. That the people of that time were good astronomers. They were able to, they had good knowledge of precession of the equinoxes. So that's what the animal symbols are essentially encoding. It's a way of dating things, and a little bit more than that. They can use the constellations to describe other things as well, not just dates. So they can describe the passage or the path of the radiant of a meteor stream, and whether there's a meteor strike and so on. So it's so that's the key thing, is this kind of blurring the line between prehistory and history, because we're now able to go back into areas of that were just prehistory, and we're now able to start decoding what people were writing, essentially. So that's the key thing. And then that leads you into all sorts of things. For starters, there's the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and Göbekli Tepe and that link. But then you can look at the cave art and try to understand what is it that people were doing when they were drawing or painting these animal symbols. What message were they trying to convey? So yeah, the key thing is the ancient zodiac. We can even use it to date. That's probably the main use at the moment, is to date ancient artifacts. And I give a couple of examples in my book and a few more examples on my blog. So there are lots of artifacts that we can narrow down their dating. Quite often, ancient artifacts, they're dated according to maybe a radiocarbon date, or maybe a radiocarbon date's not possible because there's no organic content to whatever it is that they're looking at. But now, if they have these symbols on them, we can now date them using our zodiacal method.
So that's interesting, because I've inquired a couple times over the years as to what, obviously that previous culture probably wasn't using the same, like Pisces and Leo and Cancer, and they would have had their own. So have you been able to correlate those to which ones they line up with today?
Yeah, and they were. The crazy thing is, they were using the same constellations, but they had different not all of them are the same symbols. Quite a lot of them were different symbols, but it was the same constellations, or at least more or less. When a good example is the area of the sky where we see Capricornus, they would, if that was a summer solstice or a spring equinox or whatever, that they would write that as a bull or an aurochs symbol. So whether they were seeing the same constellation we were, I'm not entirely sure, but they were looking at the same part of the sky anyway and interpreting that as some kind of mythical bull or aurochs symbol. So yeah, I could show you a list if you like.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Okay. If I'll just open up, I'll do my share the screen. I'll open up this one. Okay, are you getting that one?
Yep.
All right, so here we go. I mean, we've got Pisces.
I'm a Pisces.
Here. So that's this sort of bending bird, and this image is taken from the top of the pillar at Göbekli Tepe, but we see the same image on pottery later in the Neolithic period in Mesopotamia. So and we see it in Egypt as well. So in Egypt, it's this tall bird. It could be a crane or it could be an ostrich. It doesn't have to be the same species exactly, but it's a tall bending bird or a tall bird. I suspect. I mean, this is speculation, but I suspect that this tall bending bird eventually became the deity Thoth in ancient Egypt.
Oh.
Yeah. So here we've got Libra, and that's represented by the duck or goose, and we see the same symbol used in the Lascaux cave, the Lascaux shaft scene. And we also see that Amun, one of the Egyptian deities, was originally shown with sort of goose feathers on his head. And then that's in the Middle Kingdom. That's kind of like his symbol. And then later in the New Kingdom, Amun, it was represented by the ram. That's the sort of more familiar symbol we know for Amun. And the ram is Libra. I don't actually have that one here for us, but yeah, so the ram represents Libra, as it does today. So that's one of the symbols that has stayed the same for as long as we can see. Oh dear. Right.
Is it a fire?
I'm just going to have to pause that for a second.
That's okay.
Oh, okay, someone else has answered.
Which one is the
right,
two people dancing?
Two
Gemini,
people dancing?
Right? Gemini twins?
Ah, right. Yeah, so Gemini in our system is represented by an ibex. Or, I mean, sometimes it's represented by an ibex and sometimes it's represented by a stag or a deer. So it depends which era and which place you're in. But from Göbekli Tepe onwards, it's mainly represented by a sort of ibex, I think.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same orientation. It's just kind of the same kind of shape or what you get out of the...
Well, all of these symbols are viewed at sunset.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the system that they were using.
Okay, yeah.
Not sunrise. So for many of the symbols that we use, we see them at, or we sort of image them at sunrise, but they weren't. They were doing it at sunset. So Virgo is a bear. So this is a picture of some kind of down crawling creature on the top of the pillar at Göbekli Tepe, but we can match that to that. Turns out, I'll just find a picture for you, but it turns out that is a bear. It doesn't look like much of a bear there, but we can then match that to other places like Çatalhöyük, another ancient site in Turkey, and to Paleolithic cave art, and it corresponds always. Virgo corresponds to the bear. Let's see if I can find. The right slide.
What's Virgo today? Is it not a bear today, is it?
Virgo is the sort of lady, isn't it?
The virgin, the lady.
Virgin, yeah. No, I can't find it here. Anyway, that's the bear. Let's go back. Sagittarius is the eagle or vulture. And again, we see that in different places. Possibly this eagle or vulture becomes Horus in ancient Egypt, but that's bit of a guess, but it's quite speculative. Yeah, so it seems that there are these animal symbols and the constellations. That whole system was more or less fixed, more or less constant, apart from one or two changes here and there. So, for instance, there are in the cave art, Paleolithic cave art, Libra is sometimes represented by the mammoth. Or I guess it's the mammoth rather than an elephant, and sometimes by the duck or the goose. But pretty much it's fixed until we get to the Bronze Age, and then it seems that the Mesopotamians, they made all sorts of changes, and that's where we get our constellations from. That's our constellation set. It's from the Mesopotamians, and they made all sorts of changes.
When's the Bronze Age?
Oh, right. So that'll be about 3000 BC onwards.
I see. So this would have been, they would have been using the same symbols for a while after the end of the Ice Age, after the Younger Dryas. They were still using the ancient symbology for 10,000 years or so.
Yeah, as far as we can tell at the moment, this goes all the way back to 40,000 BC. Probably. That's likely to be the case, 40,000 BC. It could go back further than that. But yeah, pretty much the same symbols all coming forward until, like I say, about 3000 BC in Mesopotamia. And then the Sumerians or the Babylonians start making changes. So they change Gemini to the twins, for instance. The ones that we're familiar with. But yeah, until then, it's pretty much fixed. Such a long, long time. It seems that it was more or less static until writing came along, and I think that makes a massive difference. Once you start having writing, the sort of the elites lose control of the knowledge, if you like, and it becomes more of a democratic thing, and so other people can start getting involved, and that's when there are these changes.
With the what was that? The first, like the Emerald Tablets. Was that the first writing?
Oh, I don't know about that.
I think I thought it was around that, or maybe it was longer.
I mean, yeah. So in Mesopotamia, I think
build
first writing
without writing.
Yeah, in Mesopotamia, the first writing occurs about just before 3000 BC. They have these clay tablets that they write their cuneiform script on, and it's pretty similar in ancient Egypt, more or less the same time, but a different script, a different language, obviously. Yeah.
So how does this correlate? Like, how does this ancient zodiac correlate to the Younger Dryas then, and what happened to Göbekli Tepe before the end of the Ice Age?
So, Göbekli Tepe. Are you still seeing my screen there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
So Göbekli Tepe
that's pretty detailed, eh?
Yeah, is using the same system, as far as we can see, that has been used for thousands and thousands of years. So that's the one I've just shown you. So here we have pillar 43, or the vulture stone, which is giving us the date. So it's using precession of the equinoxes to encode a date. So here we've got Sagittarius at the summer solstice. We've got Pisces, I think that's the autumn equinox, Gemini at the winter solstice, and Virgo at the spring equinox. And so these handbags are actually, well, we're pretty certain they are actually
like seasons,
sunset symbols. Yeah, because it's the equinoxes and the solstices.
Oh, I see. So the sunset at those relevant, when the sun changes, when it's either from its equal space or it's at its lower or highest. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So have you seen any? Because I mean, a bunch of those ancient paintings have people carrying that handbag around. I wonder if that correlates somehow. That handbag looks just like that one too.
From where? Yeah, like Easter Island, or
like the ones that people are always carrying in the old, like even like I think it's what's his name?
South Africa as well, I think, or
in
South America.
South America, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean. That there are these ideas about the handbags and how they might be the same symbol. I suspect it could be true that they are the same symbol and they might be related to these handbags, but it's difficult to know because the distances and the times are so far apart that it's hard to see any kind of causal trail between them. So they might just be completely coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the sort of traditional view of those handbags is that they are just some kind of priest's, maybe like a water bucket or something with holy water, and they're sprinkling the holy water, which absolutely could be the case. That could be how they were used at that time, but their symbology might have a much older and sort of line to it. So it's possible that they could be related to these, but that's a very tenuous connection, I think, at the moment anyway.
So where's the fourth sunset then?
Right, so you've got the summer one here.
Oh, okay, it's at the bottom. Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah, and then there's those three. So that's that pillar. And then you've got, there are lots of other pillars at Göbekli Tepe. So this one, pillar 2 from enclosure A. So we've got the aurochs, the fox, and the tall bird. So that's Capricornus, Northern Aquarius, and Pisces. In fact, I think I've got an image where I compare them next to the constellations. I'll see if I can. Here we go. Right, there you go. So again, there's a pretty good match. This is the Pisces one. This is the northern part of Aquarius, which looks like the fox, and Capricornus looks a bit like the aurochs. And you could say, well, maybe they are, and maybe they aren't. It's just a bit of that's very subjective. And at this stage, it is that is quite subjective. But the thing is that we've essentially scientifically proven that the animal symbols are constellations, not through Göbekli Tepe, but through our analysis of the cave art. So what we're able to do with the cave art is to compare. So what people were doing in the caves, it seems, is that when the summer solstice was Capricornus, they would paint a bull. When the summer solstice was, let's say, Leo, they would paint a horse, and so on. So we're able to compare the dates, the radiocarbon dates of those cave paintings with the zodiacal dates from precession of the equinoxes and our zodiac, and they match up perfectly in practically every case. So statistically, in a scientific sense, we've proven that the animal symbols are constellations, and it's the same animal symbols here. So we can say, look, these are constellations, and when you match them, when you ask, well, what constellations could these be? This this is what you find. So so what does this mean? Well, these three constellations here, that's the path of the Taurid meteor stream at that time. So
Son of a
Göbekli
bitch.
Tepe is, yeah. So Göbekli Tepe is all connected with the Younger Dryas event, according to our interpretation.
So is that like the
And,
sequence that those constellations follow in the sky?
Absolutely, quite right. Yeah, I'll just show you another one. Here we go. Why is it not coming up? There we go. Right. So yeah. So at the time that Göbekli Tepe was occupied, around 10,000 BC, the Taurid meteor stream would be you'd see it emanate from a particular direction in the sky, and that would have been at the time Capricornus, then Northern Aquarius, and then Pisces. That's the path it would have taken over the course of about a month. The radiant would move in that direction, and which is exactly what we see on this pillar, or at least we can match that to these symbols on the pillar, which we know are constellations. So yeah, so that could either be them just writing down the path, or it may be that this is actually the name. Maybe this is it's possible that they called the Taurid meteor stream by this name, if you like. These three symbols represented it. That's a possibility. And the reason I say that is because these pillars are so similar to the
cave art.
Hang on, no, not the cave. I'm probably going a bit quickly. I need to now find another slide. I don't know that I've got it here. Oh well. Right, anyway, these pillars are so similar to the hieroglyphics that we see, so that the Egyptians had a way of writing names with hieroglyphics. They would have symbols inside like a curved boundary with a horizontal line at one end, and it looks just like one of these pillars. So I suspect there are lots of these kind of links between Göbekli Tepe and ancient Egypt.
What about ancient Mesopotamia, or South America?
Yeah, well,
Have you got to go digging into there at all yet?
I haven't really. No, that's again, that's a very different part of the world, a different mythology. So I haven't really looked at the symbols there, but I suspect it's probably true because this system goes back possibly 40,000 years, which means there was plenty of time for this zodiac, this system, to have dispersed across the world.
Mm-hmm.
With the Americas supposedly populated around, I don't know, 15,000 years ago. So yeah, at that time, it gives plenty of time anyway for this knowledge to have percolated into the Americas.
Even in the conventional model.
I'll give you an example that I came across just the other day. So, in Central and South America, I think it was they had these Puma warriors. Is that the right Cougar warriors? Puma warriors. Yeah. So the Puma symbol was very popular. It was like one of the most prominent symbols from about I think it's about 1200 BC up to about 0 AD. So a stretch of 1,000 years or more. Now it just happens at that time that the constellation Cancer is the summer solstice, and in our zodiac, Cancer is represented by the feline, the large cat. So it's possible that these Puma warriors, or this Puma symbolism, is again, it's all just reflecting this system where, in our case, Cancer is the constellation corresponding to the feline. But I haven't looked at it closely, so that's just one example. That could be coincidence.
So it really does seem like it was, as far as Göbekli Tepe is concerned, and that it was almost they were following this almost as a warning system. Like if they're tracking the Taurids, and they know that in the past, like before the Younger Dryas, there was that other event. So did they know, like, was this thing covered up between events, or did they know that the torrid, during that time, the Earth was bombarded, let's say, and then they know when that happened due to their calendars and because they're following all this stuff. They're following the sun and the moon and in all their structures, so they know when this stuff is happening, and then they see the torrid coming around again, maybe, and that's when I don't know. I mean, it just seems like the skeptical argument of just this being, you probably caused quite a bit of a stir with your scientific background. I mean, I read some of and they just I don't know, maybe it feels like you're stepping on archaeologists' toes or something like that when you're decoding all this stuff, but they don't seem to take into account that all across the globe, they were following the sun and the moon, and they had all these alignments in their megalithic structures. So obviously they knew they were following stuff, and they knew what was happening. And it seems to be relevant that what you're pointing out here is that they're following these streams that could have just, caused the Younger Dryas, and that's why they covered the stuff up before it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sort of conventional view is that astronomy just wasn't practiced by ancient people before, let's say, the middle of Mesopotamian time, so in the middle of the Bronze Age, around 2,000 or 3,000 BC. So before then, the general view amongst academic archaeologists is that that's when astronomy started. So all of this stuff that you've just said about alignments of temples and what have you, that's just not taken
serious.
We kind of know that this is correct, right? But yeah, your standard academic archaeologist won't accept that.
Really?
Say,
they still don't accept that stuff? Because that's what surprised me about reading some of the skeptical responses. Like, well, you guys should know by now that it's not just a coincidence that the moon lines up on its lunar maximum in between these two things, and from a view from the temple. I mean, that's not just coincidence.
Probably, I wouldn't say all of these sort of academic archaeologists,
but the mainstream,
the ones. I'm not even sure if it's exactly the mainstream, but certainly the ones that I have been in contact with are typically the ones that object to this. So maybe they're a fringe in the archaeology community. I don't know.
Well, they're a loud one. I mean, we're still living in the paradigm where this, any kind of ancient alternative history theories are pretty much ignored or ridiculed. So,
yeah, that's right. So, let's say it's very contentious anyway that there is this idea that astronomy could have been studied before the Bronze Age. Of course, we know that, and I've now proven with this correlation between animal symbols and the constellations that's absolutely true. So all of this speculation, all of the studies which were looking at the orientation even of the ancient caves. So lots of these caves systems, they are also pointing either directly south or directly at the sunrise on the equinox or whatever it is, so that they also have these solar alignments going way back. So it's very clear that there was this astronomical tradition, but it turns out they knew a lot more than we have given them credit for. But that's not accepted at the moment.
So what's this graph that you have up there on the screen now then?
Yeah, okay, I know that. Thank you for reminding me. So you were saying that the world was being bombarded and there are all these climate shifts. So this is just really showing us that, this is the Younger Dryas period, and this is where the temperature drops by over 10 degrees right at the start. And there are papers that show that this temperature drop happens within a space of a year. This is from analyzing ice cores from Greenland. They can see that this happens within a year, not the whole of this temperature range, but it's when this temperature starts to drop. It happens really quickly within a year. And there's no way that, as far as I understand it, that can be reproduced by any climate model without some kind of catastrophic event. Mm-hmm. So that's another piece of the evidence that this happened. And then you can see that there are these massive fluctuations in temperature. So the thick black line here is the temperature record from the Greenland ice core. So that's like a proxy for northern hemisphere temperature. And the thin line here is temperature from the
Antarctica.
Ice
Man,
core
we
record
gotta
from
get
Antarctica.
gotta get down to Argentina, man. You know, that's why the Nazis were going to Argentina, because when shit hits the fan, it's not so bad. It's got to be because of all the water, right?
Yeah, well, that I mean, what you're saying is actually it's an important thing, because what it shows is that in the southern hemisphere, the climate is much more stable than in the northern hemisphere over the ice age. This is going back 40.
We gotta get out of here, man.
This is going back 40,000 years, and I talk about this in my book. There's a reason why the climate in the southern hemisphere is much more stable than the northern hemisphere. It's quite a technical reason, but you can see these dramatic fluctuations, and the sort of general view among climate scientists is that these are all a natural part of Earth's climate.
With the solar, is it related to the solar cycles, or not sure?
Well, I don't know how they explain it. Well, I kind of understand the mechanism, but not what initiates the mechanism. What kind of prompts this switch to happen? And I think it's not really something that's known very well. It's not understood in the climate community as to what is actually driving. They can see in their models that there is this sort of two-state system where in the northern hemisphere the temperature can either be high or low, and the high point corresponds to an interglacial period when the ice has receded, and the low point corresponds to a glacial period when the ice has come all the way down, well, part of the way down across the North Atlantic Ocean. So this is tracking the ice covering in the northern hemisphere.
So for all the people listening on audio, we're looking at this graph, and it goes back to 40,000 years, and there's 10 to 15 degree swings in the northern hemisphere within a few hundred to 1,000 years. It's just massive swings, whereas the southern hemisphere is just sort of along, maybe there's a 3 to 5 degree swing, and it's way less of a variance there. And then you hit the Younger Dryas, and then they both steady out after that big shift.
The south one seems
about
pretty
12,000
steady.
years ago. No, but it goes up to the zero. Like what's the zero? That's the temperature difference. So it kind of moves into that stable environment. I mean, it's sort of doesn't this put a little bit of perspective on today's hysteria over global warming, and that what we're causing when you look at these massive shifts back then?
It does a little bit, in the sense that
that shit can happen without out of our control, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So, but the difference is, I think, even by today's, the temperature change, the rate at which temperature are changing today is extremely quick. So it's as quick as some of these much older events, but it's being caused, according to the theory.
How can it be that quick if it hasn't really gone up that much, and we might be moving into an ice age? How can it be as quick as it was back then?
Well, those spikes are over probably 100 years, right, or 200 years.
Yeah, that's right. So they have a width to them.
Yeah,
so
but they're
that's right.
huge.
So
they're huge spikes. I mean, we haven't.
They are. They are huge. Yes. Yeah. I mean, you can't really compare today's climate change to the ancient changes. Now, the thing is, these, I can show you another picture. These, this is from a paper a couple of years ago, which shows how megafaunal extinctions appear to correlate with these temperature changes. So again, this is I think this is
a good graph.
Northern hemisphere temperature changes from a ice core, and you can see how these silhouettes here, they are the positions or the times of extinction events, mainly extinction events, yeah. And you can see they correlate pretty well with these dramatic fluctuations in climate. And the same with this sort of cluster of extinctions around the Younger Dryas period. Again, they correlate pretty well with these fluctuations in climate.
Well,
so
especially that other one. That's
pretty clear.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
This other one that's the megafauna from 30,000 years ago that went extinct?
Yeah, the middle part. And then the one to the left is more at the Younger Dryas there, yeah.
So they can't blame any of those that were in North America on people. Or they have to they gotta give us some ground someplace.
Oh, actually, that's a good point, though. Is that what you get into in your book? Is like, how can you blame the people for overhunting if that whole section went extinct in the middle of the Ice Age?
Yeah, basically, yeah. There are a lot of extinctions, it's thought, around this time, and the evidence that they were caused by human overhunting is not there. So
right.
in this paper, they correlate them with climate change.
Right.
Yeah. Problem, and that's that. I kind of agree with that. I'm pretty sure that dramatic changes in climate will have a massive effect on, the animals and whether they can find the food and how quickly they can migrate to get to new sources of food and so on. But if you, I discuss this in the book. If you think about South America, got another picture, I think. South America, that the climate in South America is pretty stable at this time. And yet there are the megafauna in South America. We've lost just as much megafauna in South America as North America. So climate can't be the only factor here. Climate doesn't explain everything. It probably explains part of it, but it doesn't explain everything. It's the same with overhunting.
Yeah, right. So it's not just overhunting and climate. I think what you're getting to is you're hinting at something catastrophic.
That's right. So the evidence suggests that there is another cause, and it might even be a dominant cause of these megafaunal extinctions, and therefore also perhaps these climate switches, is that they're driven by something else, like you say, some kind of comet impact. So I go into that in the book, and
so do you think?
Obviously, that's.
Do you think all those crazy spikes before now are those just all impacts?
Well, okay, so this is.
Oh, that's interesting.
This is now.
Or like even the other one you had after that. You had
the one was showing the megafauna?
The one that was showing right up to present where it really came out. Yeah, the one that was showing the megafauna extinction.
The megafauna, right, here we go. Yeah.
So on the bottom of that, there's all those you got on the left there, that's now. And then
that's now,
so starting like 12,000 years ago, it's a shit show for like 30 or 40 or 50,000 years.
Yeah, basically, that's the idea, is that at the moment, that one of the leading theories is that these megafaunal extinctions are caused by these climate switches. But that doesn't explain South America. So what I'm saying is that, well, maybe it's not just climate. Maybe, and in fact, maybe it's comet impacts, which is causing these climate shifts, as we kind of almost know now with the Younger Dryas.
And it could be like, so what you're saying is it could be a regular cycle of the torrid, let's say, that causes those spikes, and then something happened at the end of the Younger Dryas when it's almost like we reached the pinnacle of those impacts, and then it sort of steadied out or something.
Exactly. That's the point I'm making. Now, the science of the Younger Dryas period is pretty good. There's a lot of evidence that it happened, and we know how sudden it was.
Right.
This time back here, apart from the climate's known very well, but the extinctions and their accuracy, this is a bit more vague, simply because of the time depth is much longer. So what I'm suggesting is it's possible. It's a maybe that these were caused also by comet impacts. And the reason for suspecting that might be true is that the sort of the theory, the astronomical theory for the Younger Dryas impact is based, as you've just said, on the Taurids. Well, the theory behind the Taurids is that there was this giant comet that entered the inner solar system, and it would have taken tens of thousands of years to break up and fragment. So we wouldn't, supposing that that's true, and I think the evidence is extremely strong that it's true, we wouldn't expect just one event like this. We would expect multiple events like this over the last 20, 30, 40,000 years. So yeah, it could be that these are being driven by other comet impacts, just like the Younger Dryas.
Right, and then you can picture it going through, like we enter through that stream until eventually there's nothing left because you've gone through it, or you've gone through the major parts of it, and now we're back to the, to the end of it, kind of like where it's more dispersed. Does that make sense, Darren?
That's right.
Or smaller.
Yeah, that's right.
Or smaller, yeah.
So exactly. So the comet breaks up, it fragments, it turns gradually into dust, and I'll just show you another slide. And that process can take tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
So this is the zodiacal dust cloud that we observe today. So this dust is essentially the dust from an ancient comet. Probably most of this dust is from one comet, probably this giant comet that entered the inner solar system. And yeah, so knowing the size of this comet, this is like a lower bound to the size of the comet. It was probably over 100 kilometers in diameter. And based on that estimated size of this comet, we can kind of estimate the number of fragments that it would have produced. And that then tells us that we should expect, if I just wind forward, that's Comet Encke. We should expect about 10 impacts over the last, say, 30 to 40,000 years. About 10 impacts with comets equivalent to a half a kilometer in size. And we can expect one impact with the fragments that are about a kilometer in size. So probably the Younger Dryas event was that really bad one. Perhaps, and then these other ones further back in the Ice Age, they might have been these other, 10 is an approximation, it's like an estimate. But we can expect that there would have been many other
they could have caused the Ice Age, right? Because what we're saying, the last Ice Age started 36,000 years ago or something. When you start looking at those numbers, they all seem to cycle into procession somehow or another.
Yeah,
well, okay, starting the Ice Age, I don't know. The Ice Age started 100,000 years
ago.
Yeah,
it's been a long cycle, but it's been a long cycle even past that.
I thought 39,000 years ago or something, it was kind of not so bad.
There was this period in the middle, I don't think I've got a figure for this, but there was a period in the middle of the last Ice Age when things kind of warmed up a bit, almost like an interglacial, but then we went back into the Ice Age. I don't know if it's here in that picture. Yeah, I think it's this kind of region here where it was almost like an interglacial period.
Oh, and that's what you're talking about, Darren, yeah.
And so I would suggest that maybe all this stuff from about 40,000 years onwards, that might be the effect of this giant comet. So this giant comet maybe entered our inner solar system, 40 to 50,000 years ago, started to break up, caused lots of extinction events and climate change, rapid climate changes. And then there was this massive one, the Younger Dryas. And now, like you say, it's fragmented and turned to dust so much. All that's left pretty much is this zodiacal dust cloud. Plus, there are still a few fragments, but there's not so many and they're not so large. And they're not really a risk to us anymore. And that's where we are now in the Holocene period. This last 10,000 years.
Are we going through this? We're going through that right now, or no?
No, we're not going through the dense part of this Taurid meteor stream. According to the astronomers, we're due to go through the dense part of it. Supposedly, it kind of correlates. They think the densest part of this, it's like a filament. It correlates with the orbit of Comet Encke. They think. And we're due to kind of intersect that in about 3000 AD, so in about 1,000 years. So we've got a while yet.
Don't we go through the Taurids twice a year, though?
Yeah, we do. So the way to think about the Taurids is, it's like this great big revolving... Actually, I've got another slide. Best way to show it. Get this one up.
Well,
and I thought once was right now.
Are you trying to piece it together also as part of the Great Year as well? Like how to
Yeah, I think it fits in somehow to procession. I'd imagine procession would play a role. But I'm just thinking right now. I'm thinking about I think we go through the Taurids in a couple of weeks. And these days, I'm always a little nervous about going through the Taurids.
So if you think about. If this is the Earth's orbit, which is circular more or less, so we're looking at it from side on here. And then you've got Comet Encke and the Taurids. They orbit more or less on the surface of a plane, which is inclined to our orbit. Now, there are two types of...
Perpendicular almost.
Well, that's what I've drawn it here, but actually it's not. It's this is an exaggerate.
Yeah.
it's an exaggerated picture. So the Taurid meteor stream, or Comet Encke anyway, is inclined at about 12%. Here it's about 45, degrees.
Yeah, I see. So there's a ton
so anyway,
of moving parts there. So I mean, when the maximum hits the maximum, ooh, look out.
That's right. So now that the Taurid meteor stream is so old, 20, 30, 40,000 years, that it's become really broad. And so the bulk of it or large parts of it move around like a donut shape. But within that donut shape, there are these elliptical filaments. So that's this kind of orbit here. So I'm kind of describing Encke's orbit here in a very sort of approximate schematic way. And you can see that when you have this apsidal precession, which happens within this plane, so the orbit stays sort of fixed within this plane, but it can rotate around the sun. And you can see that at some point in the future, Encke, which we think is kind of at the heart of the Taurids, the sort of dense part of the Taurids, that's going to intersect Earth's orbit down here twice on this side. And then as it rotates all the way around, it's going to intercept twice over here as well. And that whole process takes 6,000 years. So basically, there are two high-risk periods separated by about 3,000 years. There are a high-risk period on this side, and then 3,000 years later, a high-risk period on this side.
The next one's in 900 years?
Sorry, and then...
The next high risk is in around 900 years or so?
That's right, yeah, exactly. Now, there's another kind of precession, which maybe we don't need to talk about, but it's called a longitudinal precession. And it's that's where this plane in which the orbits are precessing, that whole plane rotates around the sun. So you can imagine this angle here is increasing. That's longitudinal precession. And it's that precession that causes the position of the radiant of the Taurids in the sky to move along the zodiac. So that's how we could work out how the Taurids would have looked at the time of Göbekli Tepe because of the longitudinal precession. But anyway, the kind of catastrophic ages that you were talking about, that's the apsidal precession every 3,000 years. And that kind of correlates with these, there are many myths have these ages of darkness, and then there are these, recovery and so on. So you've got that all over the world, these catastrophic myths.
It's fascinating. I wonder if that 3,000 matches those spikes you were looking at, Darren, in the ice age, right?
Yeah. So at least it's comforting to look like we're through the worst of it, because shit wasn't too bad 3,000 years ago. Or was that one? No, Tunguska was only a few hundred years ago. Not even.
Yeah.
100 years ago.
So that's the thing, you see, is that although the densest part, the core of the Taurid meteor stream, the high risk part is every, say, 3,000 years. That doesn't mean to say there's no risk at other times.
Yeah, there could be a whole other system coming through at some point.
Yeah. And different parts of it will be processing at different rates. So that's why you'll still get things like the Tunguska event 100 years ago. But still, that was probably still part of the Taurid meteor stream, but a slightly different sort of filament or a different substream of the main complex. So the risk is always there. It's just maximal every 3,000 years.
And for how long? So is that like maximum last 10 years or 50 years?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I from what I read, so the real experts on this are the astronomers, Victor Klube and Bill Napier and their colleagues. And from what I read in their papers, they say this period of risk is a couple of hundred years, maybe 500 years.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
500 years? Every 3,000 years?
Yeah.
So that means like you're in it like
18% of the time.
Yeah, this is
That's right.
Well, we got a couple hundred years. Fucking party.
Yeah, we should be good for a few years yet, I think.
Well,
I'm just trying to look for
unless the sun fucks us up. I mean, if that goes into like solar minimum, if it continues, then we might be, might not matter what's flying around in the sky if there's no heat.
Yeah, so if you look at going back to this picture, it's probably the clearest one. So if you look over the Holocene period, so that's the last 10,000 years, there have also been lots of fluctuations, much smaller. But so for this event here, this is known as the 8.2 kiloyear event by climatologists, and it turns out that that was exactly when we were passing through. That's one of these episodes when we were passing through the Younger Dryas. Through the
Torrid. Yeah.
The Torrid.
Wow.
Yeah, right there. It's the biggest one in the whole Holocene.
So
correlates with the passage through the Torrids.
Oh, that is interesting. I wonder if there's any. Is there any evidence of impact on the Earth at that time?
People haven't really looked, I don't think.
Yeah.
But it's something I discuss in my book, and I suspect that. Well, let's think about the controversy surrounding the Sphinx and the dating of the Sphinx and Robert Schoch's weathering.
Yep.
And so there's a theory. I think it's Graham Hancock's theory, or maybe Robert Bauval. I'm not sure, but they date. They think that the Sphinx is representing Leo.
Yeah.
And that would therefore put the date of the Sphinx at around here, sort of 10,000, or 12,000 BP, so that's 10,000 BC. Now, it turns out that there is no evidence that feline shapes represented Leo at this time. All the evidence points to giant feline shapes, or large felines representing the constellation Cancer.
Yeah.
Now, Cancer is the summer solstice in this period. Yeah,
oh, that's interesting.
So I suspect that if there was this ancient Egyptian lost civilization, and I think probably there was, because I kind of agree that the Sphinx probably is much, much older. I think all the evidence is pointing to a much, much older Sphinx than conventionally thought. So I suspect that the Sphinx was built here, and it was the 8.2 kiloyear event. That led to the end of this ancient Egyptian civilization.
So the Sphinx was just before that or after that?
I suspect the Sphinx was just before that. Yeah. That's the era when Cancer is a spring equinox. So that's when they would have been having all these. And we see the same symbols at Çatalhöyük. I've mentioned that before. Çatalhöyük was one of the world's first towns. It had a population of, say, between 5,000 and 10,000 people in Turkey, southern Turkey, not too far from Göbekli Tepe, actually. And at Çatalhöyük at this time, you see leopard shrines. So at Çatalhöyük, they've got leopard shrines, and I suspect at the same time they were building the Sphinx in Egypt along the Nile. But then, boom, there's this 8.2 kiloyear event. Çatalhöyük comes to an end. It pretty much does. It's the sort of beginning of the end of Çatalhöyük. After that, it kind of disappears over the next few hundred years. And of course, I think you've got the end of this ancient Egyptian civilization. Now, the thing is, there is no evidence at all of any kind of population, any kind of people during this period along the Nile in ancient Egypt. It's like it's a complete blank. It's like a black hole. Apparently, there was no one there. They were wiped out.
They were still in Atlantis then. They were moving over from Atlantis.
They were swimming back up and getting washed out. I mean, the interesting thing about that is, like, for all intents and purposes, the world's 12,000 years old, because before that it was a total shit show. For 100 or 1,000 years.
Well, not the whole
like
world, though. I mean, the whole world wasn't encased in ice. I mean, the northern hemisphere was way worse.
Yeah, but if all those are
hemisphere.
impacts, then the megafauna in the south is dying too.
Yeah, see, the thing is, I mean, the Younger Dryas event here was experienced really badly, obviously, by North America, and it seems perhaps South America as well, and parts of Europe. But that's, like I say, that's not the whole world. However, if you've got this fragmenting comet, all these other events, not all of these comet fragments are going to impact the northern hemisphere.
Right. In
fact, most of them are going to impact into the Pacific Ocean. That's the largest expanse that we know
that's a
of.
good point. Yeah, that's a large percentage of the Earth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about a third of the surface of the Earth is the Pacific Ocean. So we can expect several of these events to have taken place in the Pacific. So then that makes you think, well, there are these enigmatic features that Graham Hancock's talked about quite a lot in his books. Could these events in the Pacific be something to do with that? I think it's quite likely that there were civilizations. You see, that the current view is that the Pacific Island civilizations go back about 3,000 years, maybe a little bit more. And before that there were no people in these Pacific Islands. They were uninhabited, more or less. I suspect that there were other civilizations in the Pacific, but they got wiped out. And it's, you know, if you accept this model of this giant comet causing the Younger Dryas impact and possibly lots of other impacts as well, then it kind of logically follows that the Pacific would have been the riskiest place on Earth to live. Because if you get one of these impacts into the ocean, then it's going to create a tsunami, a mega tsunami, and that would probably spread out across the whole ocean. So if you get an impact anywhere in the ocean, Pacific Ocean, you know, practically nowhere is safe.
Yeah.
On the, you know, around the edges of the ocean.
Yeah. So, geez, do you think have you come across Atlantis and all that in this, like, so talking about that, I mean, I've heard rumors of, what do you think, Darren, about being in the, you know, in the Azores or something, or in other areas that maybe.
Well, it makes me think more about talking to Dave Matheson and about how he thinks the Bible is all like encoded astrotheology, and it's all to do with, and you know, it just makes me think that was like a continuation of following these stars and tracking these stars, because they fuck you up every couple thousand years, and it just all got sort of hijacked.
Absolutely, and that's, again, I think that's completely right. It's something I discuss in Prehistory Decoded. You have all these myths and religions from all around the world, including current day religions, that have this cycle of catastrophes in them. Christianity is no different. And if you read, there's a great book on the origins of mythology by Michael Witzel. So he's a Harvard professor of Sanskrit, but he likes his mythology as well. And he can see that, according to his view anyway, that all of these mythologies, these catastrophic mythologies, they go back to about 40,000 years.
What's the book called again?
So his book is Origins of the World's Mythologies.
Oh, okay.
So again, his time scale of 40,000 years, it fits really well with this view that there was a giant comet that came into the inner solar system about 30 to 40,000 years ago.
I think you'd really like. We've had a guest on quite a bit on the star myths. David Matheson, Darren was just mentioning him. He's got a couple really big books describing all the different myths in the world and how they can correspond to the same constellation throughout. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah,
got a couple encyclopedias.
Now you mentioned Atlantis. Now I suspect Atlantis. Well, I suspect that's probably just Plato's invention. So I'm kind of conventional on that. I don't think there was an advanced civilization that lived on an island known as Atlantis. I suspect it's probably some kind of generalized flood myth. That could be the case.
Yeah, and a lot of people think it's not just a one like island, but it's just the whole global culture at that point was called Atlantis. You know, it was that whole advanced global culture.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah. So and as far as I know, there isn't any. It's only Plato that talks about Atlantis. I don't know that there are any other before Plato. I don't know that there's any other record. The Phaethon myth, though, so that's rather than the flood, the Phaethon myth is a great fire, a conflagration. That is well attested from several sources. So it seems that this Phaethon myth was in sort of wide circulation. So I suspect that is kind of a more direct vision, if you like, or record of something that happened. And that could actually go all the way back to maybe this Younger Dryas impact, the Phaethon myth.
So do you feel like the mainstream is starting to move towards the catastrophism as opposed to the gradualistic theories on stuff?
I think it's clear now that catastrophism is correct. I think most scientists, maybe nearly all scientists, would be catastrophists of some sort. The difference between, I guess, from my position and most other scientists would be how recently catastrophes have occurred. So I think that the general view is that, yeah, they can occur on the time scale of millions of years. So,
Like the
we kind of
dinosaurs,
accept.
yeah.
Exactly. So we accept the dinosaurs, and there may have been a few other things like that, but nothing recently, and certainly nothing that would have affected humans. So that's the last, 10,000 years for civilization, or maybe 100,000 years for our sort of development and so on. But so what we're saying, and I think the catastrophists, the sort of classical catastrophists would say, yeah, it's affected mankind and pretty badly, and especially the last 30 to 40,000 years, which is where we get all this catastrophic myth. And again, the usual view, I guess, of academics is that, it's just such a low probability event. This can't have happened so recently. But the thing is, those people, they don't know about this theory of a giant comet, which it goes by the name of coherent catastrophism, this theory. So they either don't know, or if they know about it, they don't accept this theory of a giant comet. But the evidence for this giant comet is really, really strong. It's almost certain that it was part of our cosmic environment over the last 30 to 40,000 years. So I think eventually, with all of this evidence mounting up, eventually science will come to accept catastrophism on the timescale of human civilization, the timescale of where we've been recording myths and creating myths. But we're not there yet. I think there's only a few of us that have dared to go down that path.
I think the Comet Research Group is getting ready to drop a lot of stuff with these new Norway or Greenland impact sites and stuff like that. At least the younger, driest one seems like it's getting close.
Yeah, I think
I'm interested to what they're going to teach my kids. They're a couple of years away from starting to learn that.
I think people are wavering. I think if you'd asked that, say, 5 years ago, I think it still would have been pretty much negative. I think I don't really know, but I suspect these days it's a much more people are much more willing to consider it. Give it another 5 or 10 years, I suspect it will come pretty much accepted. A bit like the case of the dinosaur asteroid. It's the same kind of time scale, maybe 10, 20 years. It takes that long for, there's so much momentum in science. These old theories, you kind of have to. People get very attached to them. They spend a lot of time doing their research into these ideas, and when it turns out that they're wrong, it's really hard for some people to give them up. So it just takes time.
Did you notice that in your previous career, and or the other work you do in chemical engineering at all?
No.
No, not a lot of dogma there at all.
No. In my field, chemical physics, it's I would say that people are hardcore scientists. They're good scientists, hardcore scientists, and if evidence comes along, they look at it, they measure it up, they consider it, and if it requires a change in the way of thinking, yeah, it takes just a couple of years for the message to get out. And then there is none of this dogma in the field that I work in.
That's interesting. I wonder why that is. Is it just because it has less of a cultural impact, or it says less about us as humans, or something like that?
There's no room for personal
bias.
Well, not that. It's even like archaeology in whole is just like a couple of things, and then a lot of
changes,
conceptualization.
You're saying that science is a little more subjective than the chemical engineering?
Yeah, it's super subjective than chemical, way more subjective than chemical. I would say like chemical engineering is like 5% subjective, and that's probably on the R&D end of it. And, maybe more. I'm sure Martin can correct me. And then, archaeology is like 95% subjective.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right.
Huh.
Yeah. When in my field, the evidence is clear. You can debate about the methods that are used, and maybe there are some problems with some of the methods, and then you kind of refine those. But it doesn't take long normally to get to like a clear view if there's some kind of problem that needs solving. But if you're talking about archaeology and anthropology, they're talking about events that are so far in the past. It's very difficult to know what happened then. And particularly archaeology, but also anthropology, less so the climate scientists and the geologists and so on. They're good scientists in the main. But if you're talking about many of the archaeologists and anthropologists, they're not scientists. They talk about archaeological science, but they don't do science. They're not. They're right in the middle of what I would call humanities, and the whole way that the scholarship in the humanities works is completely different to science. And I think there is this problem that so much of the humanities, a lot of it is based on, if you like, storytelling. And so you sort of create this story which you kind of think might be correct, and then that story just kind of perpetuates. It doesn't really get challenged because the evidence is very difficult to find that challenges it. And so this story just gains a life of its own. And the people that sort of promulgate these stories, that their sort of their position in academia is, a lot of it is based on their sort of reputation. And so it's so much harder to push back against that.
Yeah,
in a way, it's like high-end mythology. Archaeology is like high-end mythology.
It reminds me of,
and maybe not even that high-end.
A lot of these humanities, the archaeology, anthropology, it is itself more like a religion.
And let's be honest, it's like white dudes interpreting ancient people's stuff under their religious whatever.
Well, I don't want to categorize it like that. I mean,
all right, sorry.
I'm
sorry for being racist, Graham.
So, but it does remind me of we had an interview with James Brown who gave us a completely different view on the Egyptians. Like his theory is the electric Egyptians, like they were playing around with static electricity and stuff. And a lot of their hieroglyphs showed that. And I mean, so it was interesting to learn about the dogma about how people just think that, because somebody said it in the early 1900s, this is what a hieroglyph means. We've thought that ever since, and nobody's really challenged it. But he comes along with this whole new theory about how they were harnessing static electricity, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna.
You don't have to comment on that.
Cautious there.
Yeah, but it's just good to look at it a different way. That's all. But what was that?
Yeah, I don't read hieroglyphs. I mean, there are these, the Baghdad batteries and so forth.
Yeah,
so it's possible. It's possible they were doing things like electroplating, and then, well, if they could do that, then why not? Maybe some kind of lighting, but
it was just the simple things like the hand mirror that they have, or they're always holding. Like people were just making up that was I think it was supposed to be a hand mirror or something, or I can't remember what the current the mainstream view of what that object was. That you see it all over the place, and he was saying that could be a way to grab static electricity. So it's just interesting things like that. And it was just a disc-shaped thing with a handle on it that you see everywhere.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to there is called the menat. So it's part of some kind of ornament that Egyptians would wear.
Yeah,
it's particularly associated with the goddess Hathor. And I've had a discussion about this with an archaeologist. And so my view is that could actually be representing a comet. It's got a classic comet shape.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
The disc with the tail.
Yeah.
We see that shape quite often. And if these Egyptian gods, if their mythology and religion actually is much older than conventionally thought, so if it's obtained from a much older civilization, and that civilization, because of the Younger Dryas event, was basically all about comets, then it kind of makes sense that you should see a lot of comet symbolism, even in modern day religions. That comet symbolism might have survived. So I suspect that menat shape, it's possibly just a comet.
What do they think? What do they think it is? Or what did he think it was? Do you remember what that?
Well, I mean, everyone has to speculate about it. I think. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. There's there is some kind of explanation. It's got something to do with flowers or something like this. I'm not entirely sure.
Flowers in her hair. Flowers everywhere. Well, I mean, there's a temple in India that's carved out of a single piece of stone. So they were up to something. I mean, I don't know what it was, but I mean, that shit's crazy.
Oh,
so,
yeah, there's tons of mysteries.
You know, and they were doing this on the side of dodging comets. So, you know, it's just, it all seems so crazy to me. But the one in India, I'd like to go there. India's pretty safe too, I think, right?
Safe how?
Like to travel?
Well, depends on your definition.
Yeah. So again, the Indian mythology and religion, according to this idea, it should all be connected to,
well,
you know, all the Egyptian stuff and the Indo-European religions. So yeah, it's likely that the comet symbolism is there in the Indian religions too.
I'm wondering how the Vedas, because I'm trying to think of all those like old Vedic time,
Kali Yuga and all
the
that.
Kali Yugas, and I'm trying to remember what all the times of those, but I'm pretty sure those all lined up with the great year cycles and everything else, right? I wonder if there's a three. So the Mayan calendar was what, 5,000 and some?
Yeah, I don't know about the specific time periods, but the whole concept that you can have these sort of cycles of time with destructions followed by civilization starting again, that's such a common theme throughout pretty much all the world's, well, not all the world's, but many of the world's religions, including the Indian, the ancient Indian sort of Vedic and Kali Yuga stuff. So yeah, that's all part of it, I suspect. Yeah. And if you think about another really interesting connection, I guess I talk about this in the book, is the trident. So we're familiar with the trident from you've got Poseidon, you've got the devil with his trident. Well, the trident is connected with all sorts of deities, Indo-European deities. So if you go into India, you'll see Shiva, and Shiva has the trident. So this trident kind of connects all this mythology as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, there is a stone. I got a picture of it. I will find a picture of this stone that was found in Göbekli Tepe. Hang on, let's see if I can.
The Mayan calendar is 5,125.
I was going to say
long.
5120. Wow.
You would have been off
and
by
that's
5
the
years.
and that's the quarter of the is it the quarter? The quarter of the great year?
It would be a fifth.
A fifth of the great year.
It wouldn't. It's
Right.
It's not
Here we
really on
go.
that, but it might be on like two of those fucking wallops.
Yeah.
All right, so this stone was found at Göbekli Tepe,
The trident.
and I need to turn it around. Hang on. There we go. So the archaeologists interpret this as a bird. Well, the archaeologists see it this way up, actually. They see it as a bird, and then a tree or a person, and then maybe a snake. Whereas I suspect if you turn it around, this is the trident.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this means comet god, I suspect. And again, you can link that to there's a pillar at Göbekli Tepe which has a similar motif on it. So I suspect this trident means comet god, and this means basically an airburst. I suspect this is some kind of explosion, and this is the cosmic chaos serpent. So this is a very familiar, very well-known myth in practically all of these ancient religions, where there is where sort of destruction and chaos is represented by a snake or a serpent that falls to earth. And again, that's I suspect some kind of meteor or comet that's impacting Earth. So what you've got here is the comet god attacks or destroys the cosmic chaos serpent that falls to Earth. And that story is retold across thousands of years in all sorts of different religions. You can go to the Norse myths, you can go to the Indian myths, you can go to the Egyptian myths. It's the same story.
There you have it.
So
we'll have to get you and Dave Matheson together.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. Are you going to be heading back to Göbekli Tepe at all? Is there more research to be done there, or is there anything else that you want to mention from your book?
To be honest, I haven't actually been to Göbekli Tepe.
Perfect. So when's the first trip?
Yeah, I mean, I'm planning to write another book, perhaps in a couple of years' time. So at the moment, I'm sort of collecting more stories, more evidence. And some of that will go on. Some of that you can see on my blog. So my blog is martinsweatman.blogspot.com. So you can see lots of these the sort of discoveries that we're finding all the time on the blog. And then I plan to write another book, a sort of follow-up to the current one, perhaps in a couple of years' time, which brings lots of that evidence together to create another sort of coherent story.
Nice. Did we forget about anything in your book that we should talk about?
I think we've covered a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, we seem to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any plans to come over to this side of the pond anytime soon?
Over to America, to the Americas. Don't have any plans, but I think for the next book it would be really good. I think I would need to actually get on my bike and go traveling, and actually take some pictures and get around a bit. So yeah, could be.
Yeah, we were going over Randall was showing us. We were doing some mound presentations and stuff on the Ohio mounds and how those even have celestial and astronomical alignments and stuff. So it's pretty interesting. This is going to be like, pretty soon we'll realize that globally they were paying attention to the sky and designing their structures around it.
Absolutely. Well, right on. Go ahead.
So I just come back to that point as well. You mentioned it earlier, and I didn't quite get to answering it. But these events might not have been a complete surprise. So it may have been because this you'd be able to monitor this comet as it's orbiting around, and probably there'd be maybe 10 years or maybe even 100 years when you can see that this comet is getting sort of closer and closer as it goes through its orbit, and so they may have been able to actually kind of, maybe not predict, but they would have had some kind of, I don't know, maybe a prophecy of doom or something, when they could expect maybe in 10 years' time that we're going to get hit, and so we need to prepare for it. There could have been that going on. So it may not have been a complete sudden surprise each time this happened.
Yeah, I agree. And there might have been more of a verbal, they might have been the stories, telling each other stories of since the flood. The flood myths are all over the world. I mean, they might have been, very accurate in their storytelling to each other as well as what happens to match like watching the sky.
3 weeks Thursday.
What's 3 weeks Thursday? The Torrid?
Boom.
The Torrid?
I don't know. No, I'm just
What's
picking a day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Picking a day for the end of the world, bro.
Yeah.
Well, we're actually going through the beta Taurids and the eta Perseids right now.
So these
are the daytime Taurids. It's the same meteor stream, but it's coming from a different direction, from the direction near the sun, so we can't see it because it's a daytime.
I think some of the myths say the last one came from the direction of the sun.
Ah, all right. Look, that's interesting.
That's some motherfucker.
Hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight until boom. I think we'll get a couple years notice. Hopefully a couple days anyway, enough to get my affairs in order. I got a cave picked out in the mountains here, not far from the studio. It's about an hour's drive from the studio. We got to start packing some supplies into that cave.
Little bug out bag.
You need to learn all your hunting and gathering skills.
I know, that's the thing. I don't even want to hunt.
That's it.
Darren wants to, so it won't be much of an adjustment for him.
No, that's it. I'll be good to go. And we might come to England one day, and we'll come and visit you.
Yeah. We'll let you know if we're there. We might do a little. Right. We might do a little event out there or something.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah. Really excellent.
Right on, Martin. Well, thanks for taking some time out of your Saturday night and chatting with us here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll put links to all your stuff in the show notes.
Great. Well, thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Come back anytime.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye for now. That was our chat with Martin Sweatman.
That was pretty interesting. It was good to get some different graphs on there and the weather, extreme weather stuff. Not weather, climate, I guess, back then. I don't want to call it weather. I'll be in trouble. What do you think?
It was good. Yeah. Kind of interesting. It's always weird dynamic to be in the studio on a Saturday afternoon. But it was great. Yeah, loved it. I like how it all sort of fits in with some of Randall's work and some of Dave Matheson's stuff, and it's kind of almost like a bridge between them, you know, which is interesting.
Still a bit subjective, the constellations being, you know, the path of the Taurids and all that. But I can see how, I mean, if the thing that I always have to keep in mind is that they were paying attention to that. It's not just like you're pulling the celestial stuff out of your, you know.
Well, that's where I'd like to get Dave in and see about the constellations, because he'd pick up on all that stuff real quick, right? Yeah. He's looking at the constellations nonstop. And I've often thought there's no way they would have the same, you know, we've talked about it before, how the Sphinx wouldn't have been, there's no guarantee it was Leo then.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was changed at Mesopotamia. They changed.
Well, I don't know if that's where it changed. That's where the Illuminati got together, changed that shit. Those bastards.
They're like, we got to take over this stuff.
I'm sure they had their
no
best.
more people writing on tablets.
I'm
As soon
sure
as they started
had
writing
the
on
best of
tablets, they're like, we
intentions.
got to get control of this stuff.
I'm sure they had the best of intentions. No, probably not. Anyway, big thanks to Martin for coming on the show. Check out his stuff over at martinsweatman.com. I don't know if that's a website or not, but
it's Martin. It's just throwing it out there. What a guy. It's martinsweatman.blogspot.com.
So close.
Yeah.
That'll be in the show notes. Yeah, big thanks to Martin. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks to those of you who choose to support the show, grimerica.ca/support. Without you guys, there is no show. So instead of feeling guilty, head over to grimerica.ca/support today and become one of those people that support the show and become one of the reasons why the show exists. Other than that, thank you guys for listening. Do all the stuff in the show notes, review the show, share the show, sign people up for the newsletter. Be kind to people. Anything else?
That's about it.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. Pow. Hey, you know there's a clock right in front of your face, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't tell me how long. I don't
Oh.
know when we got started recording and all that.
Oh. Well, you can always look at the stream time here.
Can't see that far.
We got to get you some glasses.
I got glasses. I just,
You probably can't see that one. Anyway. Thanks you guys for tuning in live. The studio is slowly coming around. We've rearranged it again. I like it like this. This monitor over here is fantastic. Anyway, we're out. Thanks for
You're kind
listening.
of trapped in there, though.
I am kind of trapped in here. Sacrifice I'm willing to make. Bye, guys.